Hello, and welcome to Boss Anatomy. I am Zachary Oliver, and I want to look at boss fights in depth. Now, forgive my unprofessional mouse cursor on the right there. The boss fight in question that we're going to talk about is the two Gargoyles from Dark Souls, which is one of the first giant barriers to progress that most people fight in Dark Souls. Now, it's a very interesting boss fight, if you think of it just from a pure design perspective. First, I just want to have a quick overview, as you'll see the thing running in real time in 60 frames per second, because my computer can actually run it now. And it shows me basically in a heavy armor build, running a Knight Shield and a Broadsword. Now, I've upgraded the Broadsword to +5, which is pretty much the intended strategy for this fight. It's mostly based around weapon upgrades and how much damage you can output at a specific point in time. Now, the hard part of the fight really does not come from either dodging or blocking the attacks, it's from Gargoyle number 2. As you've probably noticed by now, you can see that the camera makes it much more difficult to actually fight this boss than anything else in the entire fight. Because one Gargoyle is trying to attack you with his normal attack patterns, and the other one is breathing fire at you from a pretty far distance and preventing you from attacking the other one. Now, the second Gargoyle that comes in has half health, which does alleviate this somewhat, but one of the Gargoyles is always going to be trying to attack you with fire as long as he or she, or whatever gender they are, is alive. And as you can see, there's a lot of frustrating camera angle issues that crop up as we go. I end up stuck at a wall at one point, and the camera just kind of goes ballistic when I'm locked on. I would guess that the game wants you to kind of remove the lock on, but that also seems very screwy because just about every other encounter in the game can be done this way. So I don't understand why the fight was designed that, but we're going to take a more in-depth look at it once the video actually finishes, because simply speaking, I do kind of finish the boss fight in about 3 minutes. It's not very long, but as you can see, once the first guy's dead and you have enough damage output to kill the first guy, the second guy is also relatively easy. You can kind of move underneath his spear swings, and then he's just gonna, keep doing that. You can kind of use the roof to your advantage too, because you can duck underneath. But yeah, once the first Gargoyle's dead, it's not really a big deal. And the boss fight's over. Look at that, 3 minutes. All right, so let us discuss this a little more in depth than we just did. Alright, so we return to the beginning of the fight. We run in, we skip the cutscene once again. Takes us a couple seconds. Alright, the first thing he does is he runs right in, we pause it. Every time I've done this boss, he charges in and he does that overhead attack. So clearly, you're meant to dodge out of the way or block it or do something that involves you not getting hit with that, because it does a lot of damage, and the game is basically teaching you that this enemy is going to be pretty aggressive throughout the entire fight. Let's move on to the next part. So immediately after that, you go behind him. Notice that when you go behind him, he flies around over, just in case. Then he backs off. Then he goes for his traditional double swing attack. So you'll notice that I also chopped his tail off, which wasn't intentional, but it did happen anyway. Anyway, the point is that even though the boss is easy to move around like most enemies in the game, he's going to aggressively move back in order to teach you that you're not just going to get free shots in this enemy. You will be able to take advantage of his speed, which isn't the fastest, but you'll also need to strafe around him. There's subtle cues that the game's teaching you here. You just don't notice them half the time. Is that if you get an opportunity to attack him, he's going to back off and find a way in an angle of attack from which to get you in some other way again. Alright, and after the tail cut, he pretty much does the exact same thing over and over again. It's the same exact thing. Sometimes you go across, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you avoid his attacks using the spatial awareness around the roof. Sometimes he hits you like that. I just block. And then, oh, there's the second enemy. And then things get really complicated and weird and bizarre. All right, I want to back up a little bit just to show. Oh, there it is, the fire, right? There it happens again. So, as you can see, the enemy came in without me even, seeing it come in. which is weird to think about, right? So the first time you go into this fight, more than likely you're going to be fighting the gargoyle by yourself, and you go la-di-da-di-da, well, this isn't too difficult, I guess. Or if you're having problems with the game, you'll probably die to the gargoyle anyway. But let's say you go through enough attempts, and then eventually you're going to actually meet gargoyle number 2. You know, you may not even see it come in because of the way the lock-on system works. Now, this time, obviously, I was completely blindsided because I know when it's coming out, which is when the first gargoyle hits about 50% HP, but it's not like 100% certain when it's just going to randomly attack you, which is the part that is not fun at all. So I'm kind of mixed on how to think about these fights, because as far as like multi-target boss fights go, there really aren't a lot in Dark Souls. The only one that really comes to mind is Ornstein and Smo. Now, I mean just the original game here. And that fight has its own problems with the multi-target thing, but in general, the Souls combat system is not really designed around multi-enemy combat. You're supposed to use a mixture of not being locked on and locked on, and I guess you could say that's kind of what this fight is trying to teach you, but that doesn't seem 100% accurate either. And for a lot of players, it's just kind of this frustrating mess where you're kind of getting hit with fire all the time from 1 or 2 gargoyles, and then you die and you're like, oh, there's fire everywhere, and you know, my character can block it, but a lot of people at this point, they're like either going to roll through damage or they're just going to get flamed to death, and I don't know if it's a good design decision or not. I kind of err on the side of it not being great, but if you're talking about just pure shock value, then they certainly succeeded in shocking most people who are going to play the game and then see this thing come at them and then fight 2 at once. But on the other hand, you can think of it as both these enemies really are doing different things, so it's not really that big of a concern. So most of the time, the other gargoyle is just going to blow fire. That's it. He only blows fire the whole time. And then sometimes the other one does too, but it only seems to occur when you're at a certain distance from both of them. And then one's always going to try to chase you. So it's not like a super big deal. It's just meant to be a multitasking thing. It's just a weird thing to teach players because they're never going to actually do this again. And then we have all these camera issues. You can see that was just madness right there. It really screws up the lock-on system because you're trying to avoid that, and then there's another guy there, and it just sometimes it seems like very wacky, a very wacky fight. A lot of it, to me at least, seems like it's not training you to really understand the lock-on system. It's just training your ability to have like a +10 weapon. Because if you have enough damage output, you'll kill them fast enough that this won't be a problem. Or if you're in my case, you have the right armor build on, you'll be able to block everything, and it's not really a big deal. I play heavy armor builds in all these games, so it's not like a super... Oh my goodness, it's giving me disoriented. But it's not a super big problem. And I think right here, I think I ran out of... I didn't run out of stamina there. That's what's weird about that part, is that it hit me over the head, and I still got hit. So confusion abounds. Sometimes Dark Souls can be a little inaccurate. And so then the guy hits the fire in the air and the fire on the ground. There's fire everywhere. And you're just kind of waiting for a shot. And that's the thing about these multi-target battles. It's mostly a measure of just like waiting. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for like a hit. The gargoyles fight in particular, you're just kind of waiting for a hit. Then you hit the guy and you wait for a hit. And then you hit the guy. And it's mostly about not overextending yourself. Now, is this a lesson you use very much other than in this fight? Not really. That's what makes it kind of strange, the way it's designed. And as you can see, I just killed him right there. And victory achieved. Hooray! But I'm not 100% sold on the efficacy of this fight. So that's what I'm kind of talking about here. So, what exactly is this boss fight supposed to teach you? So first of all, I think that shock value is a pretty important part of this. So I don't think most boss encounters don't begin with like 2 guys trying to attack you. And so like most Dark Souls fights, including let's say the one after this, like Capra Demon, it's meant to just like put you in a state of unease and shock. And a lot of boss fights in a lot of situations in Dark Souls are just meant to overwhelm you with a sense that you have no idea what you're doing. Even though if you kind of keep a cool head and you do a level-headed analysis of what's happening, you'll be like perfectly fine. So that's one element of the whole thing. And that shock value leads to something that's actually pretty simple in the long run. Is that like both the Gargoyles have pretty simple patterns. They're not super complex bosses. They do things that other enemies in the game have done to this point. They mostly just do like slash here, slash there. They're bigger, but they're not doing anything like super special or anything. And part of that is because the difficulty does not come from a traditional source. It comes from you being unprepared, you not knowing what you're doing. And if you don't, or if you haven't upgraded your weapon to +5, whichever one comes first, then most likely you're going to die. And Dark Souls is all about handling unfamiliar situations. It's not really a test of skill so much as it is a test of understanding where you are and the patience to understand this. Because the moment that you become impatient in a Souls game, you usually die. And especially in the Gargoyles fight, right? You can see in my entire fight that I basically kind of just circle around waiting for an opportune time to hit things. And every time that I make a stupid mistake is most of the time me getting impatient and trying to hit them when I can't actually hit them. Because the first time when there's one gargoyle, you're just kind of looking at the patterns and just hitting him whenever you can, because you can circle around him freely. But what happens is that the second gargoyle constrains your movement pattern. And this constraint is what makes the fight interesting. So when you're fighting the two at once, you have to deal with the other one. You have to at least be perceptively aware from the periphery of what the other gargoyle is doing, which is usually a fire attack. And whether you have to block that or you have to reposition to the other side of the roof, these are all different things that you're going to have to think about as you're doing the fight. And obviously, Souls is kind of a testing bed for experimentation. So the run back here is not really that long, so you can just kind of try different ways to deal with multiple enemies, and this helps you in the long run to figure out how to approach different situations in Souls games. And honestly, this is like not that difficult of a fight, assuming you're paying attention and knowing what you're doing. And of course, you could summon people. Souls kind of always has an out for these things. But in general, this is a pretty simple boss with pretty simple patterns. It's just that the environment, the roof, and the setting, and then the fact that the gargoyle just comes out of nowhere your first time, and then kind of constrains your movement and what you can do is what makes it difficult. And the big thing that this fight is teaching you is to deal with the lock-on mechanic. So the lock-on is kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Souls games. So you want to be able to lock onto a target so you can circle, strafe around it, get backstabs, all this sort of thing. At least in the case of this fight, to chop off the enemy's tail and then get a cool weapon out of it, which happens in a lot of fights, actually. But the lock-on mechanic also constrains your field of view. So you're focused around one target, you can't see what's happening with the other targets, which is exactly what happened when I was fighting the boss. But this fight is to teach you that lock-on is not usually the best solution to everything. Now, it's a good solution, but you kind of need a mix. When you're especially in a multi-enemy combat situation, you probably don't want the lock-on on. And if you do have the lock-on on the whole time, then you want to be able to move yourself so that the camera shows you everything that's in front of you. You don't want enemies jumping behind you, which is a big problem. You can even see this in the way that like the gargoyles jump over you and they hit you, or they jump over you and do the tail whip. The whole intention of those is to show you how disorienting it is to have the lock-on the entire time. Now, in this case, obviously, you want to keep the lock-on so that you can dodge away, or you can block, or do something, whatever, to the enemies. But in general, lock-on is not 100% the best solution to everything, and that's like especially true of Capra Demon, which is the next fight that comes after this one. And definitely for Ornstein and Smo, lock-on is mostly necessary to keep both of them in your field of view, because they bounce around a lot, and that's not really great either. So there's a lot of different ways to mess around with not having lock-on on, and clearly the game is trying to teach you this lesson. Of course, the big lesson, obviously, is that you should just upgrade your weapon, but that's not really an interesting point, is it? Although I just put a big bullet point up there so that everybody can figure that out for themselves. So, upgrade your weapon. That's really the best hint I can give you. I think it's meant to be a stat battle, really. All this analysis, and that's kind of a dumb conclusion, but that is pretty much the reality. If you don't upgrade your weapon, you're not going to do this on your first try. And that's pretty much clearly what it's meant to teach you. But anyway, if it's just a DPS requirement fight, that's still fine, right? It's still teaching you something about Dark Souls systems, and in that sense, I think it is kind of a success. Although I think it can be overly frustrating for most players, and it's kind of a weird fight overall. I think Ornstein and Samo is better, even though it's got its own issues, but what are you going to do? Alright, well, this has been the Boss Anatomy. I am unsure about this series. If you have any questions, comments, whatevers, please leave a comment below. Give us a thumbs up if you liked it. Don't give me a thumbs up if you didn't like this. One piece of advice, upgrade your weapon. And I will see you next time, hopefully with something perhaps more substantial. Bye!